In 1912, one factory in Chicago put a toy inside every single box of candy it sold. Walk into any home from Boston to Los Angeles, and there was a 1 in 4 chance you'd find one of their prizes in a kitchen drawer, a tin whistle, a paper ring, a baseball card that, if you still had it today, might be worth $60,000. At their peak, this company was so embedded in American life that a songwriter put their product by name into the song that gets sung at every Major League Baseball game. Every single game. For over 100 years. Then something went wrong. Not with a crash, not with a scandal, with a sticker. In 2016, a corporation replaced the toy with a QR code. Sales didn't collapse. Nobody boycotted. The news cycle ignored it completely. A tradition that had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and 4 generations of American children simply ended, and the country moved on before it even noticed. This is the story of Cracker Jack, not just the candy, the factory. The German immigrant who arrived in Chicago in 1871 with nothing but the clothes on his back solved a problem no one else could crack and built one of the most recognized brands in American history. The man who decided that every child in America deserved to feel, just for a moment, like the world had given them something for free. His name was Frederick William Rueckheim. Almost no one knows it. This is the factory he built, and this is how it was lost. Section 1. The City of Second Chances. Chicago in the 1880s was the most chaotic city in the world. It had burned to the ground in 1871, nearly 18,000 buildings, gone in 2 days, and rebuilt itself in less than a decade into something louder, taller, and more American than anything that had stood before. The railroads ran through it. The stockyards fed the nation from it. 500,000 people arrived in a single decade, most of them from Germany, Poland, Bohemia, and Italy. Most of them carrying everything they owned in one trunk. Most of them speaking no English at all. Frederick Rueckheim was one of them. He arrived from Germany in 1871, the same year the city burned with almost nothing. He found work shoveling debris from the ruins. He saved. He learned. And within a year, he had scraped together enough money to rent a small street stall on the south side and begin selling popcorn. Popcorn was not a new idea. Street vendors had sold it across the American Midwest for decades, pushing small, steam-powered carts through crowds at fairs and markets, the kernels flying open in bursts of white, the smell stopping people on sidewalks. But it was a seasonal novelty, a cheap treat, not a business, certainly not an empire. Frederick had a different idea. He brought his younger brother Louis over from Germany, and together they began experimenting. The basic product was simple enough: popcorn, peanuts, molasses. The challenge was that the molasses made everything stick together in dense, maddening clumps. You couldn't distribute it. You couldn't package it. You couldn't put it on a shelf and expect it to survive a train journey. Louis spent years working on this problem. The solution, when it came, was almost embarrassingly simple. During the mixing process, he added a tiny quantity of oil to the drum. The kernels separated. The clumps dissolved. The popcorn became uniform, light, and individually coated, each piece holding its glaze without adhering to its neighbors. Louis kept this formula a secret for the rest of his life. It was never patented, never written down in any document that has since survived. It was passed between brothers, then held in the company, then eventually died with the family's control of the business. But in 1893, that formula was ready, and Chicago was about to give Frederick Rueckheim the greatest audience in the history of American commerce. The 1893 World's Fair changed everything, not just for Cracker Jack, but for every American brand you've ever heard of. Section 2. The World's Fair, A Nation Gets a Sweet Tooth. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 was the single largest gathering of human beings in American history to that point. 27 million people passed through its gates over 6 months in a country of 63 million. 1 in 3 Americans came to Chicago that year. They walked through the White City, the great pavilions of plaster and steel that lined the lakefront, and they tasted things they had never tasted before. Hamburgers, carbonated soda, juicy fruit gum, made by a young soap salesman named William Wrigley, who had discovered, almost by accident, that people wanted his free gum more than they wanted the soap he was actually trying to sell. And at a booth run by 2 German brothers from the South Side, they tasted a caramel-coated popcorn and peanut mixture that had no name yet. The story of how it got its name is one of those American legends that is too good to verify but too perfect to discard. A salesman tasted it. He rolled it around his mouth, felt the crunch of the peanut, the sweetness of the molasses glaze, and he said, "That's a Cracker Jack." Cracker Jack was 19th century slang. It meant something of exceptional quality, first-rate, outstanding, the best of its kind. Soldiers used it. Sportsmen used it. Children used it about their favorite toys. When that salesman used it about the Rueckheim brothers' popcorn, Frederick recognized immediately that it was not just a compliment, it was a name. By 1896, the product was formally named Cracker Jack. The tagline, "The more you eat, the more you want," was registered the same year, and Louis had solved the clumping problem that had plagued them for a decade. But there was still no way to sell it at scale. The product was perishable. It went stale. It couldn't survive a cross-country rail journey in its current form. And in 1893 America, if you couldn't put it on a train, you couldn't sell it to the nation. Then Henry Eckstein, their business partner, invented something that changed everything. Eckstein developed a moisture-proof, wax-sealed package, 3 layers of material that locked in freshness and locked out humidity. It sounds unremarkable now. In 1899, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, Cracker Jack could travel from Chicago to New York, from Chicago to San Francisco, from Chicago to the corner store in any small town in any state in the Union, and arrive tasting exactly as it had left the factory. The national market was open. All they needed now was someone to put the product inside it. In 1907, a man who had never been to a baseball game wrote a song that would give Cracker Jack the most powerful free advertisement in American history. The song is still sung at every major league game today. Section 3. Buy Me Some Peanuts and Cracker Jack. Jack Norworth was a vaudeville performer. He wrote novelty songs for a living, catchy, disposable things, the pop music of the early 1900s. In the spring of 1908, he was riding the New York subway when he saw an advertisement for a baseball game at the Polo Grounds. Norworth had never attended a baseball game. He had almost no interest in the sport. But something about the advertisement caught his attention, and by the time he stepped off the train, he had written the lyrics to "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" on a scrap of paper. He handed them to his friend Albert von Tilzer, who set them to music. Von Tilzer had also never attended a baseball game. Neither man would attend one for another 30 years. The song mentioned Cracker Jack by name. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. It was not a paid placement. It was not an endorsement deal. Norworth simply needed something that people ate at a ball game, and Cracker Jack was the obvious answer. It was already being sold at stadiums across the country, already synonymous with the bleacher experience, already a fixture of summer afternoons in American cities. But the song transformed the relationship. Before 1908, Cracker Jack was a snack sold at baseball games. After 1908, Cracker Jack was baseball. The association embedded itself so deeply in American culture that for the next century you could not hear one without thinking of the other. The song became the unofficial anthem of the national pastime. It was sung at the seventh-inning stretch at stadiums from Boston to Los Angeles. It was taught to children who had never tasted Cracker Jack. It was sung by people who had never held a box in their lives. Frederick Rueckheim never paid a cent for any of it. By 1912, the Cracker Jack Company employed 700 people at its Chicago factory. The business was growing faster than the brothers had ever imagined. They needed a way to accelerate it further, a reason for people to not just buy one box, but to keep buying, box after box, unable to stop. And then, someone had the simplest, most brilliant idea in the history of American marketing. Put something inside. But the story of the toy is also the story of a boy. A 7-year-old boy whose face ended up on every single box and whose grandfather carried that face to his grave. Section 4. The Boy on the Box. The 19th of February, 1912. The Cracker Jack Company announces that from this day forward, every box will contain a prize. The first prizes were small things: paper fortunes, tin whistles, miniature puzzle pieces, metal rings, nothing worth more than a fraction of a cent to manufacture. But the effect on sales was immediate and dramatic. Children who had never cared about popcorn suddenly cared very much about Cracker Jack. They begged their parents for box after box not to eat the candy, but to find the toy. Parents bought another box, and another. The more you eat, the more you want, had never been more literally true. Over the following decades, the prizes evolved. Paper gave way to metal. Metal gave way to plastic. In the 1910s, the company issued baseball cards, small portrait photographs of players from the major leagues, individually printed and inserted randomly into boxes. Today, a 1,915 Cracker Jack baseball card in good condition can sell at auction for $60,000 or more. The children who collected them had no idea they were holding history. But the prize was only part of the story. In 1916, the company needed a face. Frederick Rueckheim commissioned an illustration for the box: a young sailor boy in a blue uniform, his dog Bingo at his side, both of them grinning with the uncomplicated happiness of a summer afternoon. The illustrator was Andrew Loomis, who would later become one of the most influential commercial artists in American history. The image was registered as a trademark in 1919. The model for Sailor Jack was Frederick's grandson, Robert Rueckheim. He was the son of Edward, Frederick's eldest boy, and he was 8 years old when Loomis sketched him. He had the kind of face that illustrators dream about: open, cheerful, the face of a child who has not yet learned to be anything other than happy. Robert Rueckheim died of pneumonia shortly after the illustration was completed. He was 8 years old. Frederick was devastated. He had built his life in Chicago, around his family, around the business that was supposed to carry his name forward through generations, around the children and grandchildren who were supposed to inherit it. And now his grandson's face would appear on millions of boxes, on the sides of delivery trucks, in newspaper advertisements across the country, but the boy himself would not live to see it. Frederick had an image of Sailor Jack carved into his own tombstone at St. Henry Catholic Cemetery in Chicago. Not the company logo, not a business achievement. The boy. That tombstone still stands. The carved image of Sailor Jack is partially worn away, now the features softened by rain and a century of Chicago winters. But it is still there. The old man chose, when the time came to decide what he wanted remembered, to be remembered by the face of the child he had lost. The next time you see that box, that red and white box with the sailor and his dog, you will know what you are looking at. A grandfather's grief, a family's memory, turned into a brand that sold 1 billion units. Section 5. The enemy within one war that almost broke them. By 1917, the Cracker Jack factory was one of the largest confectionery operations in Chicago. The business was flourishing. The prizes were a national institution. The ballpark song had made the brand immortal. Then America entered the First World War, and being German suddenly became a problem. The Rueckheims were German immigrants. They had built their fortune in America. They flew American flags. They employed American workers. But in the charged, suspicious atmosphere of wartime America, none of that was enough to quiet the questions that came with a name like Rueckheim and an accent like Frederick's. In April 1917, the Chicago newspaper, The Day Book, ran a story that caused genuine damage. It reported an altercation at the Cracker Jack factory between Frederick and representatives from the Illinois Field Hospital Corps, who had come to the factory to recruit workers. The sergeants claimed that Frederick had thrown them out and that while doing so, he had a silver-mounted portrait of German Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg sitting on his desk. Von Hindenburg was the commander of the German armies. Having his portrait displayed in your office in April 1917 was not simply eccentric. It was, in the eyes of many Americans, evidence of where your loyalties actually lay. Frederick denied having unpatriotic motives. He admitted the portrait was on his desk, but claimed it was nothing sinister. He was German-born. Von Hindenburg was a prominent figure in the country of his birth, and the photograph was no more than that. The newspaper, as the article itself noted, was not known for impartial reporting. The accusation may have been exaggerated, distorted, or fabricated. But the damage was done. The story ran. People read it. And in wartime America, a story like that had consequences. The Rueckheims endured. The factory kept running. But the episode was a reminder that the American dream Frederick had built his life around was always conditional, that belonging was not permanent, that the distance between immigrant success and immigrant suspicion was smaller than it looked. He never forgot that, and he worked for the rest of his life to make Cracker Jack so thoroughly, so irreversibly American, that no one could ever question it again. The family survived the war. But the test that would finally break their hold on the company was still decades away, and it would come not from outside, but from the forces they had built themselves. Section 6. The Last Box. How the Family Lost the Factory. Louis Rueckheim died in 1927. Frederick followed in 1934. The company passed to Frederick's old business partner, Henry Eckstein, who died the following year. Then to Frederick Jr., who ran the business from retirement in Arizona for 2 years before he too was gone. By the late 1930s, the founding generation had almost entirely disappeared. The business passed through the hands of men who were not Rueckheims, who did not carry the founders' obsessive pride in the product, who saw it understandably, practically, as a business to be managed rather than a legacy to be protected. The post-war years were, by most measures, the most successful in Cracker Jack history. The prizes grew more elaborate. The baseball card series were cultural events. Children across America were collecting sets, trading duplicates, hunting for the rare cards that might complete a run. The brand was embedded in American life at a depth that no amount of advertising could have purchased. But in 1964, the Cracker Jack Company was sold to Borden Inc., the factory on the south side of Chicago, where Frederick Rueckheim's workers had mixed molasses and popcorn by hand a century earlier, continued to operate, but it was now just one facility in a large corporation's portfolio. The decisions about the product were made in boardrooms where no one had ever met a Rueckheim. Then, in 1997, Borden sold Cracker Jack to Frito-Lay, a division of PepsiCo. The last lingering connections to Chicago were severed. The formula was the same. The box was the same. Sailor Jack and Bingo still smiled from the front. But the company that made it was a snack division of one of the largest food corporations on earth. And in 2016, Frito-Lay replaced the toy with a QR code. The announcement was brief. The rationale was practical. Manufacturing and inserting millions of small physical toys into individual boxes was expensive, logistically complex, and the toys themselves had become harder to source. A digital alternative was cheaper, safer, and, the company suggested, more relevant to modern children. That may all be true. It probably is true. But the people who grew up reaching into those boxes did not feel the loss as a logistical calculation. They felt it the way you feel it when the candy store on the corner of your street becomes a parking lot, or when the diner where your father took you every Saturday morning closes after 40 years. The thing itself is gone. But what's really gone is the version of yourself that existed when the thing was there. Frederick Rueckheim put a toy in every box because he understood something that the corporation that eventually owned his company did not. People do not buy products. They buy feelings. They buy the moment of surprise when a small hand reaches into a wax paper package and pulls out something unexpected and perfect. They buy the feeling of being given something for free in a world that charges for everything. The factory that made it is gone. The family that built it is gone. The toy is gone. But if you are old enough, you still know exactly what it felt like to find one. Outro. 40-0. 43-0. Frederick Rueckheim is buried at St. Henry Catholic Cemetery on Chicago's North Side. If you go there and find his grave, you will see the carved image of Sailor Jack worn soft by the weather, but still visible. A boy in a sailor suit. A dog at his side. The boy died at 8 years old. His grandfather built an empire in the years that remained and asked, when it was his turn, to lie beneath the child's face for eternity. That's the version of Cracker Jack they don't put on the box. If you grew up in America and you ever reached into a red and white box and felt the rustle of that small wax paper parcel at the bottom, we'd like to know. What was the best prize you ever found? Leave it in the comments. Some of you might be surprised what you remember. The old factories are gone. The families that built them are gone. But Old Money Lost is here every week to make sure their stories aren't. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time.